The morning that changed everything. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen had seen many strange cases during her 20-year career with Scotland Yard, but nothing could have prepared her for what happened on that foggy Tuesday morning in November. The call came in at exactly 9:47 a.m., just as she was finishing her second cup of coffee and reviewing files from a burglary case in Westminster. "We have a situation at Buckingham Palace." The voice on the radio crackled with urgency. "Armed suspect has approached the main gates. Royal Protection Unit is requesting immediate backup." Sarah grabbed her coat and rushed out of New Scotland Yard, her mind racing through the possibilities. In her experience, incidents near royal residences were usually handled swiftly by the highly trained protection officers. For them to call for additional help meant something was seriously wrong. The drive to Buckingham Palace took only minutes, but even from several blocks away, Sarah could see the chaos unfolding. Police vehicles had cordoned off the area, their blue lights flashing against the gray morning sky. Tourists were being evacuated in orderly lines, many looking confused and frightened as they clutched their cameras and guidebooks. As Sarah approached the outer perimeter, she spotted Chief Inspector Marcus Webb, the head of the Royal Protection Unit. His usually calm demeanor showed cracks of concern as he briefed arriving officers. Webb was a man who had dedicated his life to protecting the royal family, and Sarah had never seen him look so unsettled. "What's the situation, Marcus?" Sarah asked, showing her identification to the armed officers at the checkpoint. 23 minutes ago, a man approached Guard Post 7, Webb began, pointing toward the famous red-coated sentries who stood watch at the palace gates. He was carrying what appeared to be a handgun. Corporal James Mitchell was on duty at the time. Sarah followed Webb's gaze to where a young guardsman sat on a medical stretcher, still wearing his iconic bearskin hat, but looking pale and shaken. Emergency medical technicians were checking his vital signs while he gave his statement to another officer. The suspect walked directly up to Mitchell. Webb continued, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. According to the corporal's account, the man was approximately 6 feet tall, wearing a dark coat and jeans. He appeared to be in his 30s, with brown hair and what Mitchell described as cold, calculating eyes. The scene that Webb described sent chills down Sarah's spine. The Royal Guards were trained to face threats with unwavering composure, yet this young soldier was clearly traumatized by his encounter with the mysterious gunman. "Did the suspect make any demands?" Sarah inquired, pulling out her notebook to record the details. "Was this an attempted robbery or perhaps some kind of political statement?" Webb shook his head grimly. "That's what makes this case so unusual, Inspector Chen. The man didn't ask for money, didn't make any political statements, and didn't attempt to force his way into the palace grounds. According to Mitchell's testimony, he simply walked up, pointed the weapon directly at the guard's chest, and stared at him for approximately 30 seconds. Sarah felt her investigative instincts kicking into high gear. In her experience, criminals who threatened royal guards usually had clear motives. They wanted attention for their cause, money, or access to restricted areas. A man who simply pointed a gun and stared made no sense from a criminal psychology perspective. "What happened next?" she pressed, already sensing that this story would take an unexpected turn. "This is where it gets truly bizarre," Webb replied, running a hand through his graying hair. The suspect maintained eye contact with Mitchell the entire time, never speaking a word. Then, according to multiple witnesses, including tourists and other guards, he simply lowered the weapon, turned around, and walked away. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "He just left? No running, no panic, no attempt to escape quickly?" "Exactly. He walked at a normal pace back toward the Victoria Memorial, where dozens of people were taking photographs and going about their morning routines. Our officers immediately pursued him, of course. The entire area was surrounded within minutes." Webb paused, and Sarah could see the frustration building in his expression. As the head of Royal Protection, he was responsible for ensuring that no threats went unanswered. Yet something had clearly gone wrong with their response. "We had him completely surrounded, Inspector Chen. There were 8 officers closing in, from different directions, security cameras tracking his every movement, and helicopter support was en route. The suspect was walking through an open area with nowhere to hide and no possible escape routes. Sarah waited for Webb to continue, sensing that the most important part of the story was yet to come. The morning fog was beginning to lift, and she could see tourists being held at a safe distance, many of them recording videos on their phones and speculating about what was happening. Then what? She asked, though she suspected the answer would be as puzzling as everything else about this case. Webb looked directly at her, his experienced eyes reflecting a mixture of disbelief and professional concern. He vanished, Inspector. Completely, disappeared without a trace. One moment he was there walking calmly through the crowd, and the next moment he was gone. 8 trained officers, multiple security cameras, and dozens of civilian witnesses, and somehow a man with a gun simply evaporated into thin air. The weight of Webb's words settled over Sarah like the morning fog that still clung to the palace grounds. In her 2 decades of police work, she had dealt with clever criminals, elaborate escape plans, and mysterious disappearances. But she had never encountered a case where someone could vanish so completely in such a public, well-monitored location. As she looked around at the massive security response still unfolding around Buckingham Palace, Sarah realized that this would be unlike any case she had ever investigated. The investigation begins. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen spent the next 4 hours methodically examining every inch of the area where the suspect had last been seen. The Victoria Memorial, with its gleaming white marble and towering statue of Queen Victoria, stood as a silent witness to one of the most baffling disappearances in recent London history. "Show me exactly where you last saw him," Sarah instructed Constable David Phillips, one of the 8 officers who had been pursuing the gunman. Phillips was a 10-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police, known for his sharp attention to detail and reliable testimony in court cases. Phillips walked her to a spot roughly 30 meters from the memorial's base, near a cluster of ornate lampposts and wooden benches where tourists often rested between sightseeing stops. "He was right here, Inspector. I had a clear line of sight from over there," he said, pointing to his position near the palace gates. The suspect was moving at a steady pace, not hurried at all. It was almost like he was taking a casual stroll through the park. Sarah knelt down and examined the pavement, looking for any clues that might explain how someone could disappear so completely. The ground was still damp from the morning fog, and she could see dozens of footprints from tourists, police officers, and maintenance workers who had walked through the area. "Tell me about the exact moment he vanished," Sarah requested, standing up and brushing the moisture from her hands. "Walk me through it second by second." Phillips closed his eyes, clearly trying to recall every detail with precision. "I was approximately 40 meters away when I lost visual contact. There was a group of tourists taking photographs near the memorial, maybe 15 or 20 people. The suspect walked directly into that group." Sarah looked toward the memorial, trying to visualize the scene from Phillips's perspective. Even with tourists in the way, it seemed impossible for someone to completely disappear in such an open space with multiple officers watching from different angles. "Was there anything unusual about the tourist group?" she asked. "Did they seem to know the suspect, or did anyone react strangely when he approached?" "That's what's so puzzling," Phillips replied, shaking his head. "The tourists appeared completely normal. They were taking pictures, chatting with each other, consulting maps. Nobody seemed to notice anything suspicious or react to the man's presence. Meanwhile, technical specialist Emma Rodriguez was setting up her laptop near the memorial's base, preparing to review footage from the extensive network of security cameras that monitored the area around Buckingham Palace. Emma had worked with Scotland Yard's digital forensics team for 8 years and had a reputation for finding crucial evidence that other investigators missed. "Inspector Chen, I've pulled the footage from 6 different cameras that had views of the suspect's last known location," Emma announced, adjusting her screen to reduce the glare from the brightening afternoon sun. "This should give us multiple angles of whatever happened." Sarah and Phillips gathered around the laptop as Emma began playing the security footage. The timestamp showed 10:15 a.m., roughly 28 minutes after the initial incident at the Buckingham Palace gates. The first camera angle showed the suspect walking calmly through the crowd exactly as Phillips had described. "There he is," Sarah said, pointing to the figure in the dark coat. "Can you enhance the image to get a better look at his face?" Emma adjusted the controls, zooming in on the suspect's features. The man appeared to be in his mid-30s with brown hair and a lean build. His expression was calm and focused, showing no signs of panic or concern despite being pursued by armed police officers. "Now watch what happens when he enters the crowd," Emma said, switching to a different camera angle that captured the tourist group from the side. "This is where it gets really strange." The footage showed the suspect walking into the cluster of tourists, who continued taking photographs and talking among themselves. For a moment, his dark coat was clearly visible among the brighter clothing worn by the visitors. "Keep watching," Emma murmured, her finger hovering over the pause button. Sarah leaned closer to the screen, not wanting to miss any detail that might explain the disappearance. The suspect continued moving through the group, and then suddenly, he was no longer visible in the frame. "Go back and play that again," Sarah instructed, her detective instincts telling her that something crucial had just happened. Emma rewound the footage and played it again in slow motion. This time, they could see the exact moment when the suspect seemed to simply fade from view, as if he had become invisible, or somehow merged with the crowd around him. "That's impossible," Philip said, staring at the screen in disbelief. "People don't just disappear like that, especially not when they're being recorded by multiple cameras." Emma switched between different camera angles, showing the same time period from various perspectives. Each camera told the same impossible story. The suspect entered the tourist group and then vanished without any logical explanation. "Could there have been a technical malfunction with the cameras?" Sarah asked, though she suspected the answer would not be that simple. "I've already checked the system logs," Emma replied. "All cameras were functioning normally, and the footage shows no signs of tampering or digital manipulation. This appears to be exactly what happened in real time." Sarah stepped back from the laptop, her mind racing through possible explanations. In her experience, when something seemed impossible, it usually meant that crucial information was missing from the investigation. She had learned never to accept supernatural explanations when logical ones might exist. "What about the tourists? Who were in that group?" she asked Phillips. "Have we identified and interviewed them yet?" "We're working on it," Phillips replied. "Several officers are reviewing the footage to identify faces and checking with local hotels to find visitors who might have been in the area at that time. It's a complex process, but we should have some leads within the next few hours." As Sarah surveyed the scene around the Victoria Memorial, she noticed something that had previously escaped her attention. Near one of the ornate lampposts, there was a small maintenance access panel that appeared to have been recently disturbed. The metal cover was slightly askew, and there were fresh tool marks around the edges. "Emma, bring your equipment over here," Sarah called out, kneeling down beside the access panel. "I want to document this before we open it." As Emma photographed the panel from multiple angles, Sarah carefully lifted the metal cover and peered inside. The maintenance tunnel was narrow and dark, extending in both directions beneath the memorial grounds. Could our suspect have used this tunnel system to escape? Sarah wondered aloud, though she realized that such an escape route would require detailed knowledge of the underground infrastructure around Buckingham Palace. The discovery of the maintenance tunnel opened up new possibilities for the investigation, but it also raised even more questions about who their suspect was and how he had planned such an elaborate disappearance. Underground Secrets Detective Inspector Sarah Chen descended into the maintenance tunnel beneath the Victoria Memorial, her flashlight cutting through the darkness as she examined the narrow underground passage. The tunnel was approximately 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, requiring her to move in a crouched position as she followed its winding path. The tunnel appears to connect to the main utility network that serves this entire area, technical specialist Emma Rodriguez reported, from above ground, consulting architectural plans that had been hastily retrieved from the Westminster City Council offices. According to these blueprints, there are access points throughout the memorial gardens and connecting passages that extend toward the palace grounds. Sarah's radio crackled as she moved deeper into the tunnel system. "Inspector Chen, this is Control. We've established contact with 3 tourists who were in the target area during the time of disappearance. They're being escorted to New Scotland Yard for interviews." "Excellent," Sarah responded. pausing to examine scratch marks on the tunnel walls that appeared fresh. "I'll return to the surface shortly. Have the interviews begin without me, and record everything for review." As she continued exploring the underground passage, Sarah discovered that the tunnel system was far more extensive than anyone had initially realized. Multiple branching paths led in different directions, and several access ladders provided routes to various surface locations throughout the memorial area. 20 minutes later, Sarah emerged from the tunnel system with concrete evidence that their suspect had used the underground route for his escape. She had found a small piece of dark fabric caught on a rough edge of the tunnel wall, consistent with the coat the gunman had been wearing. More importantly, she had traced a path that led from the Victoria Memorial to an exit point nearly 200 meters away, well beyond the police perimeter that had been established. "The fabric sample is being rushed to the forensics laboratory for analysis," Emma reported as Sarah cleaned the dirt and grime from her hands and clothes. "If we're lucky, it might contain DNA evidence or other trace materials that could help identify our suspect." Sarah's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Sergeant Lisa Walsh, who was conducting the tourist interviews at Scotland Yard headquarters. The message was brief but intriguing. "Need you here immediately. One of the tourists remembers something very unusual about the suspect." The drive back to New Scotland Yard took Sarah through the heart of London, past the Thames and through streets filled with afternoon shoppers and office workers going about their daily routines. As she navigated the traffic, Sarah reflected on how surreal it was that such a bizarre incident could occur in one of the most monitored and secure locations in the entire city. At Scotland Yard, Sarah found Sergeant Walsh waiting in interview, room 3, with a middle-aged woman who introduced herself as Margaret Thompson, a retired teacher from Manchester who had been visiting London with her sister. Mrs. Thompson was taking photographs near the memorial when the incident occurred, Walsh explained as they settled around the small table. She didn't realize the significance of what she had witnessed until she saw the news reports this afternoon. Margaret Thompson appeared nervous but determined to help with the investigation. She clutched a digital camera in her hands and spoke with the precise diction of someone accustomed to explaining complex topics to students. "I was photographing the memorial from several different angles when I noticed a man in a dark coat walking through the crowd," Mrs. Thompson began. "At first he seemed perfectly ordinary, just another tourist enjoying the sights of London." Sarah leaned forward, her instincts telling her that Mrs. Thompson had observed something crucial that the security cameras had missed. "What made you pay particular attention to this man?" "It was his behavior," Mrs. Thompson replied, adjusting her glasses. "He wasn't looking at the memorial or taking photographs like everyone else. Instead, he seemed to be studying the people around him, almost like he was searching for someone specific in the crowd." Walsh showed Mrs. Thompson several still images captured from the security footage, asking her to identify the suspect from among similar-looking individuals. Without hesitation, she pointed to the correct person. "That's definitely him," she confirmed. "But there's something else that I found very strange. When he walked into the group of tourists, he seemed to deliberately position himself behind a young woman who was wearing a bright red jacket." Sarah exchanged glances with Walsh, sensing that they were about to learn something significant about the suspect's disappearance method. "Can you describe this woman in more detail?" Sarah asked, pulling out her notebook. She was probably in her late 20s, with long blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. The red jacket was quite distinctive, almost like a uniform or professional garment rather than casual tourist clothing. She was carrying a large shoulder bag and appeared to be with a small group of people who were speaking what sounded like German. Mrs. Thompson paused and looked directly at Sarah with an expression of concern. "Inspector, I've been thinking about this all afternoon, and I'm convinced that the man deliberately used that woman and her group as cover for whatever he did next. It seemed too calculated to be coincidental." Sarah felt the familiar excitement that came with discovering a crucial lead in a complex case. If Mrs. Thompson's observations were correct, then the suspect's disappearance had not been magical or impossible, but rather a carefully planned deception that relied on precise timing and positioning. "Did you take any photographs of this red-jacketed woman or her group?" Sarah asked hopefully. Mrs. Thompson smiled for the first time since the interview began. "That's why I wanted to speak with you personally, Inspector. I was taking multiple shots of the memorial when all of this was happening, and I believe I may have captured both the suspect and the woman in several of my photographs." She turned on her digital camera and began scrolling through the images she had taken that morning. After a few moments, she found what she was looking for and handed the camera to Sarah. The photograph showed the Victoria Memorial from a slightly elevated angle, with dozens of tourists scattered throughout the area. In the background, clearly visible despite the crowd, Sarah could see the suspect in his dark coat standing directly behind a young woman wearing a bright red jacket. "This could be exactly what we need to solve this case," Sarah said, already planning the next steps of the investigation. "Mrs. Thompson, would you be willing to work with our technical team to enhance these images and identify other individuals who might have been working with the suspect?" As Sarah studied the photograph more closely, she noticed something that made her pulse quicken. The woman in the red jacket was not looking at the memorial like the other tourists. Instead, she appeared to be watching something or someone outside the frame of the photograph, and her body language suggested alertness and purpose rather than casual sightseeing. The investigation had just taken a dramatic turn, transforming from an impossible disappearance into what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated plan involving multiple participants. The network revealed Detective Inspector Sarah Chen worked through the night with technical specialist Emma Rodriguez, using advanced image enhancement software to analyze every photograph that Mrs. Thompson had taken near the Victoria Memorial. By dawn, they had made several breakthrough discoveries that transformed their understanding of the case. "Look at this sequence of images," Emma said, pointing to her computer screen where she had arranged 12 photographs in chronological order. Mrs. Thompson was taking pictures every 30 to 40 seconds, which gives us an almost continuous record of what happened in that area. Sarah studied the enhanced images carefully, noting details that had been invisible in the original footage. The woman in the red jacket appeared in 7 of the 12 photographs, and in each image, her position had changed in ways that seemed deliberate rather than random. "She's not behaving like a tourist at all," Sarah observed, tracing the woman's movement pattern with her finger. "Look at how she positions herself. In every photo, she's creating a visual barrier between the suspect and at least one of our surveillance cameras." Emma nodded in agreement, pulling up additional analysis on her second monitor. "I've been studying the angles, and you're absolutely right. If this woman hadn't been standing in those exact positions, we would have had clear camera coverage of the suspect's movements throughout the entire sequence." The breakthrough came when Emma isolated and enhanced a single frame that showed both the suspect and the red-jacketed woman in profile. Using facial recognition software, she was able to create detailed composite images of both individuals. "I'm running these through the criminal database now," Emma reported, though she warned Sarah that the process could take several hours to complete. "If either of these people has a criminal record in the United Kingdom or Europe, we should have identification within the day." Meanwhile, Sergeant Lisa Walsh had spent the early morning hours coordinating with hotels throughout central London, trying to locate the German-speaking tourist group that Mrs. Thompson had observed. Her persistence paid off when she received a call from the concierge at the Langham Hotel. "Inspector Chen, we may have found our German tourists," Walsh announced as she entered the technical analysis room. The Langham Hotel has a group of 23 German architecture students who were doing a guided tour of Royal London yesterday morning. They were scheduled to visit Buckingham Palace and the Victoria Memorial at exactly the time our incident occurred. Sarah felt a surge of excitement. "Have you made contact with the tour group?" "That's where it gets interesting," Walsh replied, consulting her notes. "The tour group checked out of their hotel yesterday afternoon, one day earlier than originally planned. According to the concierge, they claimed there had been a family emergency back in Germany that required them to return immediately. The timing struck Sarah as highly suspicious. Did the hotel keep copies of their identification documents? Yes, and I've already requested them. But here's the really unusual part. When I contacted the tour company that organized their trip, they told me that no architecture tour was scheduled for that group. In fact, the tour company has no record of booking accommodations for any German students during that time period." Sarah and Emma exchanged meaningful looks. The evidence was mounting that the suspect's disappearance had been facilitated by a Much larger and more sophisticated operation than anyone had initially imagined. "We're dealing with professionals," Sarah concluded, walking over to the window that overlooked the Thames. The gunman, the woman in the red jacket, and probably several members of that fake tour group were all working together to execute this plan. Emma's computer chimed with an alert from the facial recognition system. "Inspector, I've got a match." "On our suspect," she announced, her voice filled with excitement. The database had identified the gunman as Vincent Klaus Morrison, a 34-year-old man with an extensive criminal record spanning 3 countries. Morrison had been convicted of armed robbery in France, confidence fraud in Belgium, and weapons trafficking in the Netherlands. Most significantly, he was currently wanted by Interpol in connection with a sophisticated art theft that had occurred in Amsterdam 6 months earlier. Morrison specializes in elaborate heists that require detailed planning and coordination with international criminal networks, Sarah read from his file. He's known for using theatrical diversions and psychological manipulation to confuse witnesses and law enforcement. The revelation about Morrison's background suddenly made the Buckingham Palace incident make sense from a criminal psychology perspective. Rather than being a random act of violence or terrorism, it appeared to have been a carefully planned operation designed to test security responses and gather intelligence about royal protection procedures. But why would an international art thief want to threaten a royal guard? Emma wondered aloud. What could he possibly gain from such a high-risk operation? Sarah was beginning to form a theory, though she knew it would require additional investigation to prove. What if the gun threat was never the real purpose of the operation? What if Morrison and his accomplices were using the incident as a distraction while they gathered information about security protocols, camera positions, and response times? Walsh looked up from the hotel documentation she was reviewing. "You think they were conducting reconnaissance for a larger heist?" "It's possible," Sarah replied, already planning the next phase of their investigation. Morrison's criminal history shows a pattern of elaborate advance planning for major thefts. The royal collection contains some of the most valuable art and artifacts in the world. Emma pulled up architectural plans of Buckingham Palace on her computer screen. If they were gathering intelligence about the security systems, then Morrison's team would have learned invaluable information from yesterday's incident. They observed how quickly officers responded, which cameras covered which areas, and how the command structure operated during a crisis. The implications were staggering. Rather than investigating a simple case of a vanishing criminal, they might be dealing with the preliminary phase of an elaborate plot to steal priceless treasures from the British royal collection. Sarah grabbed her coat and headed for the door. "Emma, continue analyzing those photographs and see if you can identify any other members of Morrison's team. Walsh, coordinate with Interpol and get everything they have on Morrison's known associates and previous operations." As she prepared to brief Chief Inspector Webb and the Royal Protection Unit about their discoveries, Sarah realized that the mysterious disappearance at Buckingham Palace was only the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous criminal enterprise. The trap is set. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen arrived at Buckingham Palace at dawn, 3 days after Vincent Klaus Morrison's mysterious disappearance. The morning air was crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the foggy conditions that had helped conceal the criminal's elaborate escape. Chief Inspector Marcus Webb met her at the security checkpoint, his expression grim but determined. "Inspector Chen, Interpol has provided us with intelligence that confirms your theory about Morrison's intentions," Webb began as they walked through the palace's outer courtyard. "He's been linked to a criminal syndicate that specializes in stealing high-value cultural artifacts from government buildings and royal residences across Europe." Sarah had spent the previous evening reviewing Morrison's complete criminal file, which painted a picture of a sophisticated operator who carefully studied his targets for months before attempting any theft. His previous heists had involved elaborate deceptions, inside information, and precise timing that suggested extensive planning and resources. "What's our current security status?" Sarah asked, noting the increased presence of armed officers and the subtle installation of additional surveillance equipment throughout the palace grounds. "We've implemented Protocol 7, Webb replied, referring to the highest level of security measures available to the Royal Protection Unit. Every entrance has been reinforced. Additional plainclothes officers are positioned throughout the tourist areas, and we've coordinated with the Metropolitan Police to establish multiple response teams in the surrounding neighborhoods. Technical. Specialist Emma Rodriguez had discovered that Morrison's criminal network operated using a predictable pattern. They would conduct reconnaissance missions to gather intelligence about their targets, disappear for several weeks while planning their operations, and then return to execute carefully timed heists during periods of maximum confusion or distraction. Based on Morrison's previous operations, we estimate that his team will attempt their main objective within the next 72 hours, Sarah explained as they entered the palace's central command center. The reconnaissance phase at the memorial gave them critical information about our response capabilities, and they'll want to act before we have time to implement permanent security changes. The command center had been transformed into a sophisticated monitoring hub, with dozens of screens displaying feeds from cameras positioned throughout the palace and surrounding areas. Intelligence analysts from Scotland Yard, MI5, and Interpol worked alongside Royal Protection officers to track any suspicious activity. Sergeant Lisa Walsh approached with an urgent update from their ongoing investigation. Inspector, we've identified 3 additional members of Morrison's network who entered the United Kingdom under false identities within the past 2 weeks. All of them have expertise in art theft, electronic security systems, and architectural infiltration. The photographs Walsh provided showed individuals who appeared to be ordinary tourists or business travelers, but their criminal backgrounds revealed extensive experience with museum heists and cultural artifact smuggling. Each member of the team brought specialized skills that would be essential for penetrating the palace's sophisticated security systems. "Where are they now?" Sarah asked, studying the surveillance photos that had been captured at various London locations. "That's the concerning part," Walsh replied. "All 3 individuals checked out of their hotels yesterday and haven't been seen since. They appear to have gone underground, which suggests that Morrison's team is preparing for their final operation." Emma emerged from the technical analysis station with additional intelligence that added urgency to the situation. "Inspector, I've been analyzing communication intercepts from the past 48 hours, and we've detected increased encrypted radio traffic in the Westminster area. The patterns match those associated with Morrison's previous operations." Sarah felt the familiar tension that came with knowing that a major criminal operation was imminent, but not knowing exactly when or how it would unfold. Morrison's team had demonstrated remarkable planning and execution capabilities, and underestimating them could lead to a catastrophic security breach. "What's our target profile?" Sarah asked Webb. "If Morrison is planning to steal artifacts from the royal collection, what would be his most likely objectives?" Webb consulted a classified inventory that listed the most valuable and portable items in the palace's extensive art collection. The Queen's Gallery currently houses a special exhibition featuring medieval manuscripts and small precious objects that would be relatively easy to transport. There are also several high-value paintings in the staterooms that could be targeted. However, Sarah's instincts told her that Morrison's true objective might be something even more significant. His criminal history showed a preference for symbolic thefts that generated international attention and commanded premium prices from private collectors who specialized in stolen cultural artifacts. "What about the crown jewels?" she asked, though she knew that the jewels were housed in the Tower of London rather than Buckingham Palace. "The crown jewels are secure at the Tower, but there are other royal regalia and ceremonial objects here at the palace that would be extremely valuable to the right buyers," Webb replied. "Morrison's network has connections to collectors in Eastern Europe and Asia who pay enormous sums for stolen royal artifacts." As the day progressed, intelligence reports continued to arrive from various sources throughout London. Police officers at airports, train stations, and hotels had been alerted to watch for Morrison and his associates, while customs officials monitored all departure points for suspicious cargo that might contain stolen artwork. By afternoon, Sarah had developed a comprehensive understanding of Morrison's likely strategy. Rather than attempting a direct assault on the palace's security systems, his team would probably create a diversion that drew attention away from their real target while using their inside knowledge of security protocols to access restricted areas. "We're going to give Morrison exactly what he expects," Sarah announced during the evening briefing with the Joint Task Force. Tomorrow morning, we'll stage a security exercise that will appear to reduce our coverage in certain areas while actually increasing our ability to monitor and respond to any theft attempt. The plan was risky but necessary. By appearing to follow predictable security protocols, they would encourage Morrison's team to proceed with their operation while ensuring that law enforcement was positioned to intercept them at every possible escape route. As Sarah prepared for what she knew would be a crucial confrontation with one of Europe's most sophisticated criminal networks, she reflected on how the case had evolved from a mysterious disappearance into a complex international investigation involving art theft, royal security, and criminal psychology. The next 24 hours would determine whether Morrison's elaborate planning would succeed or whether Scotland Yard could finally bring one of the world's most elusive criminals to justice. Justice served. The final confrontation began at 11:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after Vincent Klaus Morrison had first appeared at the gates of Buckingham Palace. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen was positioned in the palace's central command center when the first alerts began appearing on the surveillance monitors. Movement detected in Sector 7. Technical specialist Emma Rodriguez announced, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards as she coordinated the response from various law enforcement agencies. 2 individuals approaching the East Wing entrance, both matching the profiles of Morrison's known associates. Sarah watched the monitors intently as the sophisticated trap she had designed began to unfold. The morning staged security exercise had proceeded exactly as planned, creating the appearance of reduced surveillance while actually increasing the number of plainclothes officers positioned throughout the palace grounds. Units Alpha and Beta, maintain visual contact but do not intercept, Sarah commanded through her radio. We need to identify the full scope of their operation before we move. Chief Inspector Marcus Webb stood beside Sarah, his years of experience evident in the calm way he coordinated the Royal Protection Officers. The decoy security exercise seems to be working perfectly, he observed. Morrison's team is proceeding exactly as your psychological profile predicted they would. On the monitors, they could see Morrison himself approaching the main tourist entrance, wearing different clothing but clearly identifiable from their enhanced surveillance photographs. He moved with the same calm confidence that had characterized his disappearance at the Victoria Memorial, apparently unaware that dozens of armed officers were tracking his every movement. Inspector Chen, we have confirmation that Morrison's team has divided into 3 separate groups. Sergeant Lisa Walsh reported from her position coordinating street-level surveillance. Group 1 is creating a distraction near the gift shop. Group 2 is attempting to access the service tunnels we discovered last week, and Morrison himself appears to be targeting the Queen's Gallery. The complexity of Morrison's operation impressed Sarah even as she prepared to bring it to an end. His team was executing a sophisticated multi-pronged approach that would have overwhelmed conventional security measures and allowed them to escape with valuable artifacts, while law enforcement was confused about their true objectives. Emma, activate the lockdown protocols now, Sarah ordered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. All exits are to be sealed, and I want every member of Morrison's team in custody within the next 10 minutes, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Hidden panels throughout the palace slid open to reveal armed officers who had been positioned during the night. Exit points that Morrison's team had identified during their reconnaissance were suddenly blocked by reinforced barriers that rose from the ground with mechanical precision. Morrison himself was cornered in the Queen's Gallery, where he had been attempting to remove a 15th-century illuminated manuscript worth over £2 million. As armed officers surrounded him, his expression shifted from confidence to genuine surprise for the first time since the investigation had begun. Vincent Klaus Morrison, you are under arrest for attempted theft, weapons violations, and conspiracy to commit robbery, Sarah announced as she entered the gallery personally to oversee his capture. You have the right to remain silent, though I suspect you'll want to cooperate given the evidence we've compiled against your entire network. Morrison's calm facade finally cracked as he realized the full extent of Scotland Yard's preparation. You've been watching us since the memorial incident, he said, not really asking a question but stating a fact that he was only now beginning to understand. Actually, "We've been watching you since before you arrived in London," Sarah replied, pulling out a thick file containing intelligence reports from Interpol. "Your reputation for elaborate planning works both ways, Morrison. Once we identified your pattern of operations, it became relatively simple to predict your next moves." The arrest of Morrison's 3 accomplices proceeded with similar efficiency. The woman in the red jacket, whose real name was revealed to be Katerina Volkov, was captured attempting to escape through the underground tunnel system that Sarah had discovered during her initial investigation. The other 2 team members were apprehended at their planned rendezvous point near Westminster Bridge, where they had been waiting with false documents and a small boat intended for their escape down the Thames. Within 2 hours, the entire criminal network had been dismantled and taken into custody. The evidence recovered from their hotel rooms and personal belongings revealed the true scope of their planned operation, which would have resulted in the theft of artifacts worth over £50 million. "How did you know we would target the Queen's Gallery specifically?" Morrison asked during his initial interrogation, his professional curiosity overcoming his legal predicament. Sarah smiled, reflecting on the psychological profile she had developed, based on his previous crimes. "You always choose targets that combine high value with symbolic significance. The medieval manuscripts represented both monetary worth and cultural prestige that would appeal to your usual buyers. Plus, the gallery's location made it the most logical choice for someone with your team's specific skill set." The forensic analysis of evidence collected from Morrison's team provided additional confirmation of their international criminal activities. DNA samples linked them to unsolved art thefts in Paris, Rome, and Vienna, while encrypted communications devices contained contact information for black market dealers throughout Europe and Asia. Chief Inspector Webb personally thanked Sarah for her innovative approach to the investigation during the debriefing session that evening. "Your decision to use Morrison's own reconnaissance against him was brilliant," he said. "By allowing him to gather intelligence while we gathered intelligence about him, you turned his greatest strength into his ultimate weakness." Emma Rodriguez had compiled a comprehensive technical report that would be shared with law enforcement agencies throughout Europe, helping them identify and prevent similar operations in the future. "Morrison's network was far more sophisticated than we initially realized," she explained. "They had been planning operations against royal residences and major museums for over 2 years. The case concluded with Morrison and his accomplices receiving substantial prison sentences for their crimes. Morrison himself was sentenced to 15 years in prison, while his team members received terms ranging from 8 to 12 years. The international cooperation between law enforcement agencies resulted in the recovery of stolen artifacts worth over £100 million from previous heists. 6 months later, Sarah received a commendation from the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police for her innovative investigative work. The techniques she had developed during the Morrison case became part of the standard training curriculum for officers specializing in art theft and cultural crime prevention. The mysterious disappearance that had begun the investigation remained a topic of fascination among law enforcement professionals, demonstrating how sophisticated criminals could exploit security vulnerabilities, while highlighting the importance of psychological profiling and international cooperation in modern police work. Morrison's elaborate vanishing act at the Victoria Memorial had ultimately led to his downfall, proving that even the most carefully planned criminal operations could be defeated by thorough investigation, patient analysis, and strategic thinking that matched the criminal's own level of sophistication. The case files were sealed and transferred to the archives at New Scotland Yard, where they would serve as a reference for future investigations involving international art theft networks and elaborate criminal deceptions. Sarah returned to her regular duties with a deeper appreciation for the complex psychology of professional criminals and the satisfaction that came from bringing justice to those who sought to steal from the cultural heritage of nations.